Francis Bacon's a painter who, I think, plays with portraiture. In other words, of course, they're portraits of those very close to him, often his lovers, sometimes his closest friends, other artists like Lucian Freud. But there's never a conventional portrait. I mean, this is never really a commissioned portrait. They're the people he wanted to paint. And one senses that the intensity with which he paints is really about the relationship. It's not ever about the look of somebody in the sense of mimicry or imitation. And yet we know probably he's after the essence of that person, or the essence of what he felt about that person. In Bacon's lifetime, there was, of course, a great deal of confusion about actually his methodology, because both he and later the great critic and writer David Sylvester rather obscured the question of his sources and how much he was or wasn't using photographs. And the fact is, we now know that he used all kinds of sketches, photographs, all kinds of triggers that brought images of importance to him into the frame of the canvas. And I think the idea of a canvas as a frame in which there are often other frames, it's very frequent to see in Bacon paintings, this sense of a framework. And it's like a stage in which he then brings things to happen. He puts people on the stage, or ideas almost on the stage, and then works with those. And it's true, he breaks the bounds of what we thought of perhaps as even modern art in the second half of the 20th century. I think as Bacon was growing in reputation, as he was beginning to establish himself in the 1950s and 60s, we have to remember that this was a period in which homosexuality was outside the law. It was illegal. And not until '68 does that change in Britain. And even after that, there's considerable difficulty for those who are gay and out about it. For Bacon, you know, he had his own Soho cosmopolitan lifestyle. He sort of made that work, but I don't think one should take away from the sense of some of the difficulties, or rather, certainly the assertiveness and the boldness with which he did portray those relationships, which were not just gay, but very, very powerful, sometimes almost visceral in the way he clearly felt about other people, or one senses they felt about him. Sometimes it's quite hard to get close, or rather you get close and you feel you're almost into something too intimate. All of that was extraordinary in his work. I think Bacon was such a large figure certainly by the end of the 1960s, and in the 70s and the 80s became even greater in his international reputation. I mean, he'd always in many ways been a European artist. From a British perspective, he was never really just British. I mean, Irish in one sense, and born in Ireland and part of Ireland in one sense. And yet he was cosmopolitan, and I think as his reputation grew, it was perhaps somewhat fearsome. I think it was quite difficult for artists to feel that they'd go near his way of painting, or however important they recognized his work to be. It wasn't easily something that they could simply take on. Now, I think with some of the sort of post-war, sort of postmodern painters of the 90s and the last decade, maybe that's been more straightforward, that the kind of expressionist techniques have got incorporated into other work. But, you know, his stature was and is huge.